Thanks to At Home for joining us this hour as well. Happy Halloween. I, this year, am obviously dressed up as a out-of-shape, middle-aged lesbian. Nailed it! Just like last year. Anyway, happy to have you with us. It is going to go down as a weird sidebar in American political history that on the day the House of Representatives voted to move forward with the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump, it just happened to be Halloween. It also happened to be a day when basically all of Washington, D.C. was gloriously, floridly, deeply hungover after the hometown Washington Nationals won Game 7 of the World Series, giving the nation's capital its first national championship since the only one it has ever won before, which was all the way back in 1924. If the Nationals can win the World Series, then my God, yes, in Washington, D.C., anything really is possible. And if you want yet another sign from the news gods that we really should open our minds to what may have previously been unimaginable, another sheer coincidence today is that on Halloween and on the day that Washington woke up to its first national championship in 95 years, and on the day that the House voted to move forward for only the third time in modern American history with impeachment proceedings against a sitting president, on this same day, our great allies overseas, the Brits, today started their own election. Because as nutty as this Brexit thing is that they are going through, and as nutty as a lot of things are about British politics, the Brits do actually have one very, very sensible thing in their politics that I would do anything to have us adopt here, which is that they have a really strict time limit on their elections. Their elections are 6 weeks, full stop, that's it. I mean, unlike us, where even the primary process takes more than a year in our presidential elections, and presidential elections themselves are basically fought over a period of like 2+ years, and that's generous. I mean, it already feels right now like we've been in the thick of the 2020 presidential election process forever. The 2020 election is still more than a year away. But the Brits are having their election in mid-December this year, 6 weeks away. And so they kicked off their national election campaign today. And then it will be over 6 weeks from now. I could cry just thinking about it. Imagine the opportunity cost. Like, imagine what we as a country could accomplish if all of the energy and all of the effort and all of the money and all of the attention that we put into our never-ending presidential electioneering instead all got compressed to 6 weeks. And other than those 6 weeks, we worked on other stuff. Whew. But in terms of us being humble about the realm of possibility, about what may come to pass, about how things will play out in the long run, I think today it is also worth considering this guy. This is John Bercow. He is the Speaker of the British Parliament. It's not a direct consequence of the Brexit fight or the election that they're going to have next month that's largely about the Brexit fight. But it is sort of a collateral development that, among all the other things that happened today also was the last day that John Bercow will be Speaker of the House of Commons. And whether or not you follow British politics, whether or not you know the name John Bercow, you will nevertheless recall his signature style when you see this clip.
In order to take no deal off the table.
Order. Point order. Order. Very rude for members. Order. 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 I say to the Chancellor of the Duchy that when he turns up at our children's school as a parent, he's a very well-behaved fellow. He wouldn't dare behave like that in front of Colin Hall, and neither would I. Don't gesticulate, don't rant, spare us the theatrics, behave yourself, be a good boy, young man, be a good boy. Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford. Thank you. Yes, we know the theatrics that he perfected at the Oxford Union. Not interested. Be quiet. Point of order.
honestly, talking about things that would be nice to import from British politics, it would also be kind of awesome if in U.S. politics we had somebody who had that job, right? To keep order. But here's the thing. With all the other things that are happening on the same day today, the speaker, John Bercow, today, the guy who is stepping down in Britain, this guy who is known for this sort of thing.
Order! Order! Order!
As John Bercow steps down today as a gift from the news gods to remind us of our own humility before them, how we news consumers and citizens really cannot foresee how things will turn out when they start, as our sort of universal reminder of that today from the news gods. Today we went back and looked at how John Bercow started in his job as Speaker of the British Parliament, when he became Speaker basically a decade ago. This order guy who's become this sort of international figure of wonder for the way that he handles the British Parliament. I want you to see this. This was the very first time he ever called the British Parliament to order. This is what he was like on day one of that job, per coverage that day from the BBC.
Having abandoned the traditional robes for a more straightforward suit and gown, all eyes were on Mr. Bercow as he began the day's proceedings.
Order, order. The clerk will now proceed to read the title of the private bill set down for consideration this day.
Order, order. Okay, is that okay with everybody? Okay, cheers. Order, order. The way things start, like this gentleman on the left, often gives you no real idea at all as to what they're going to become, a.k.a. the same gentleman on the right. Things don't always end up the way they start. A reminder, I think, as the House formally starts these impeachment proceedings against President Donald Trump today. It's a reminder, I think, that any confident forecast of how this is all going to play out in the end is probably folly. We should be humble before this process. We just haven't done this very many times as a country. I mean, we haven't impeached very many presidents. We haven't tried to impeach very many presidents. And honestly, with this one, we don't know how it's going to go. The inquiry is very much in process. If they do go on to impeach him in the House, the political consequences of what appears right now to be a likely impeachment, I mean, those political consequences are quite opaque to us from this vantage point. Yes, you can guess about it, but we should be humble about it. This is a historic day today. It's not a time for speculation and prognostication. It's a time to pay attention, because this is now a live issue like it has only been less than a handful of times in our nation's history. Even as the vote was taking place in the House today, the impeachment committees were in their secure conference room, taking yet another deposition behind closed doors from yet another fairly senior Trump administration official. This time it was Tim Morrison, a close ally of the recently ousted National Security Advisor John Bolton. John Bolton himself has been summoned to testify to the impeachment as well. Morrison today testified for about 8 hours. There had been a lot of speculation, a lot of blind-sourced quotes about what he was expected to say. In the end, the headlines coming out of his testimony were very consistent with what we have been seeing from other witnesses. You're used to now seeing headlines like the ones that we saw today about Tim Morrison's testimony. Here's how the New York Times put it. Quote, White House aide confirms he saw signs of a quid pro quo on Ukraine. And then the subhead, Timothy Morrison, National Security Council aide, said a top diplomat close to President Trump suggested a military aid package for Ukraine was conditioned on investigations into Trump's political rivals. The Washington Post, much the same. White House official corroborates diplomat's account that Trump appeared to seek quid pro quo. At Politico.com, you're sensing a theme. Top National Security Council Russia official confirms key testimony linking Trump to quid pro quo. This is what it's like. These headlines out of every impeachment witness now, right? I mean, as the impeachment committees have been taking testimony behind closed doors, we've had all of these different officials come through, career officials, Republican appointees, national security officials, diplomats. We've had all of these people come through and provide what appear to be mutually corroborating accounts about the core allegation at the heart of the impeachment inquiry, which is that the president pressured a foreign country into bringing investigations and announcing investigations that he thought could damage the Democrats' prospects ahead of his re-election effort for 2020. all of these mutually corroborating accounts. Now, the president pressuring that foreign country, the president pressuring Ukraine, that pressure alone was enough to start the impeachment inquiry in the first place. But now that it has started, now that they've had testimony from witness after witness after witness showing that it wasn't just pressure on Ukraine, it was withholding things of value from Ukraine, things of value both to that foreign country and to our own supposed foreign policy. It wasn't just pressure, it was extortion. It was a quid pro quo effort. It was trying to force them to cough up what the president wanted to help him in his re-election effort. And so we've got news tonight on a bunch of different aspects of this. First of all, we've got the chairman who is leading the impeachment proceedings joining us live here in just a couple of minutes to talk us through what changes now with today's historic vote. Also, some really specific questions for Chairman Schiff, like what kind of report they're going to make to the public about their findings. That's one of the things that's in the rules, that they will make a public report of their findings. What should we expect in terms of that? Also, in terms of timing, the New York Times, interestingly, was reporting all day long that it was the House's intention to start public hearings in the impeachment of the president a week from Monday, as of November 11th. That was in their main impeachment news article all day. This evening, they dropped that they dropped that detail out of the article without any sort of note explaining why. We'll speak with Congressman Adam Schiff tonight to talk more about that, see if he can give us any clarity than we can divine from the press. There was also an important court proceeding today on the issue of whether witnesses have to show up when the impeachment committees tell them to, even if the White House tells them not to. Really interesting court proceedings today, quite sparky on the point of the judge. We will get to that as well this evening. There was also a slightly ominous development today for the president's personal lawyer, the gentleman on the left, the one who's not actually featured here in a mugshot. Interesting and probably worrying developments for the White House tonight in terms of Mr. Giuliani's potential personal criminal liability in the federal criminal cases that appear to be unfolding in parallel with this impeachment investigation on Capitol Hill. So like I said, there's a lot going on. Busy night, historic day. We're going to get into all of that stuff.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.